Wow, Karen, sex and spirit.
Yeah.
You know, I'm really not quite sure where do we start with this. And so give me your take on when you put those two together and you talk about spirited sex or sex and spirit. What does that mean to you in the world that you operate in?
Well, I would say that well, I'm going to back up out of that question.
Okay.
I'll answer that, but it's kind of a big question. So what I'll say is that a lot of people, when they approach, first of all, sex and spirit aren't often spoken to together.
That's what throws me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So in much of religion, sex is considered to be something negative or sinful or dirty, and it's negated often. However, in the human experience, especially one as we are moving upwards in terms of vibrational level, we actually can use sex as a tool to ascend more spiritually if it's done correctly. Okay, so I just want to say that.
Yeah.
So now we have to remove a ton of distortion patterns around sex because there is so many distortion patterns that come from religion, lineage, culture around sexuality, what's important, what's appropriate, what's inappropriate, what's, what is allowed for women, what is allowed for men, what can be expressed and not. There's a whole bunch of stuff, as we all know. However, what I wanted to just mention from the outset is that if approached properly, sex can actually be something that is used to transcend.
So when you talk about that as far as transcending, so do I come back and think about that as myself, as an individual, and that the fact of the matter is that I basically kind of have to do the work first before I can come to that experience with another person to actually have that transcending?
Yeah. So I'll explain. So yes, and I'll explain a little bit better, more. So, okay. When you come together sexually with another person, what often we think about is that we merge with the other. Okay, so there is a physical merging and there's also a merging energetically and on spirit level. All right. When that happens, if you have two people, so you have two people who are resonating at different rates, right? Yep. And we'll talk about the emotional aspect in a minute. But we have two people resonating individual rates. Let's say they're resonating on a scale of like 0 to 10. Let's just imagine, okay? Just for simplicity.
Okay.
So let's just say the female is resonating at 4, okay? And the male is resonating at, say, 5. That's very close. So when they come together physically and intimately, what will happen is they kind of average out between the two of them, okay? In this example, because they're close. If there's more disparity, so say the female is at 4 and the male is at 1, for example, if this continues in terms of their sexual intimacy, her resonation is going to drop. Her vibrational level will drop to meet his, okay? Because she's not strong enough to maintain the resonance at which she is, which is higher than his. If she were more complete, so let's just imagine she's a 10, okay? Because we've said the scales from 0 to 10. Let's imagine 10 is at the point where you have completeness on a spirit level, so you're inherently strong enough to maintain. Let's just imagine she's a 10, okay? And he's at 4 or 5. She will pull him up to where she is, and they'll average out together at, say, like an 8. So he is buoyed up by her resonation level. Does that make sense to you?
Yep.
Okay.
But I'd like to stop you there just for a second.
Sure.
So that example, is excellent. Let me ask you, does it have any impact if those numbers are reversed, that the man is at 4 and the lady's at a 1?
That's a good question. No, it doesn't matter which one is which. It just matters that they're different.
It's energy.
That's correct. It's a frequency level at which they are.
Okay.
It doesn't matter which one is higher in resonation. If you're male or female, it's irrelevant.
Exactly.
Thank you for asking that question. If you are at a point where you have two people who are at 10, or like say 9 and 10, okay? So 9 and 10. And they come, so what happens then is then you can enter the possibility of having what I call spirit sex. Because what happens then is you don't need each other to complete. So let me back up out of this example. So let's go back to the point where, say, the person was that I started with, where one is at 4 and one is at 5. Together, you merge together and you come into a balance between the two, and you kind of average out between the two of you. And you will, because you are averaging out in a way when you're combined, can for a moment come up to 9. because you're completing, right, up to 10. Does that make sense? If you are at that second example I used where one is at 4 and the other one is at 1, right, you'll come up to a 5, but the 1 will drag the 4 down. Does that make sense?
Exactly.
So you'll start to average lower and lower and lower. If one, on the third example, if one is at a 10 or a 9 and the other is at a 4, what happens is the one at 4 will come up to an 8 and you'll average at 10 plus. Okay, does that make sense? Because the two of you together. But the 8 will kind of drag the 10 down. Does that make sense? On the fourth example, where you have two people who are more complete, so 10 or 9, okay, in the scale, you are more complete with each other. What happens is there's no averaging anymore because you're each complete and strong enough on your own to hold. So there's no averaging happening because you're each, you don't need the other to make you stronger. You're complete and strong enough yourself. So what happens when the game changes here? Because now you're both strong enough, which means that when you're intimate with each other, you can merge together and both of you get buoyed up. You merge for the moment of the time that you are sexually intimate, and then you come apart, and you stay separate and complete and whole, but at a higher level. Does that make sense? So you've both started like here, like say, for example, like, so what, for podcast listeners, what I mean by like, let's just say at a certain point, right, you come together, merge, and now you're at a point plus 10. Okay, together, because you've come together and now separated. But because you're complete in and of yourselves, you don't need to stay merged with the other. That's the other key, is that you don't, so what happens often with, especially with women, not only women, but especially with women, is that after the sexual act, there's a desire to hook into the male. Okay, so they want to be with them, they want to stay with them, right? They want love or something. That is because there's not enough completeness or wholeness on them, because they need to have that other energetic to feel complete, right? Because what they're feeling is that completion in the merging. There's something missing. Because when you came together in the sexual act, you both rose up together, right? Like the 4 and the 5 coming together, becoming a 9, or the 4 and the 1, you know, they still become greater than what they were. But now you've come apart and you feel like something's lacking. When you're whole and complete and at 9, 10, what happens is when you come apart, there's no need to merge with the other anymore because you're complete. And you've both come up. So it doesn't, but you don't need each other in the same way because you're complete individuated beings still.